Malamed Base, page 13b. And the Gemara that we learned yesterday, we spoke about what is called an eged, what is called a bunch. Does a bunch mean one? Doesn't mean two? Doesn't mean three? Gemara said three, definitely it could mean two. Maybe a bunch could mean two. So machlokes, excuse me. It's machlokes Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, and the Gemara went through which one is which. Does Rabbi Yossi hold that two is considered a bunch, and the Rabbanan hold that has to be three, or is it the Rabbanan hold that two is a bunch? Rabbi Yossi holds it has to be three. And the Gemara brought a proof from a Mishnah. And the Gemara said, actually, the Gemara brought the initial discussion was a Mishnah about mitzvahs Ezoiv, and that was a Mishnah. And then the Gemara wants to prove it actually from a brisa. It's a brisa where it explains Rabbi Yossi's view. The Gemara says Rabbi Yossi must hold that it has to be shleisha. It's not just lemitzvah; it has to be three. So the Gemara says, okay, so then it must be the rabbis that are the ones that hold two. And the fact that it says three is only lemitzvah. So lechatchila, it's an ideal, preferable way to do it. But basically, two is okay, two is fine, two is kosher. And then the Gemara brings a proof to that. The only problem is with this whole thing is that there is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Mishnah in Pirkei Avos talks about the Shechina. And it says if there's 10 people together, there's the Shechina, different levels of Shechina. There's 5 people, and 3 people, and 2 people, and 1 person. And over there, when it talks about 5 people together, it says we have a source. What is the source? 5 people together. Va'agudasa al eretz yesada. That an aguda, that there's a bunch. A bunch, the Gemara understands means 5 over there. The Mishnah in the Pirkei Avos says it means 5. We got to pull it up here. Maybe it'll be more be able to understand this better. Let's pull up the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Mishnah Pirkei Avos. So the Mishnah over here, or a Gimel. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Chalafta ben Doisa, Ish Kfar Chananya Oymen. Rabbi Chalafta ben Doisa, the man of Kfar Chananya, says, Asarash Yoshvin v'Oiskim b'Torah Shechina Shruya b'Neiim. There's 10 people that are sitting in Oisik and Torah, the Shechina. Hashem, as it says, Elokim Nitzav Ba'adas Kel. Hashem is standing in the midst of Ba'adas Kel and Eda. And Eda, the Gemara says, means 10. Learn from the Meragbim, right? Ad Masai Leida Hara Hazois, the Eda talks about Eda there. And then the Gemara says that there's Shechina, even if there's 5. How do you know even 5? Shenemar, as it says, Va'agudasai al eretz yesada. In this bunch, or this bundle, this band on the land, he established on earth. And so the understanding from that pasuk is that Hashem is there with them when they're in a situation called an aguda. And the question is, our Gemara says eged means 3. Here it says 5 because agudasai al eretz yesada. And then the Gemara says, how do you know 3 people bring the Shechina? And it says B'kerev Elokim Yishbait, that in a court there's Hashem is there in the midst of Hashem, meaning that there's Shechina. Even in the midst of they judge in the midst of the Shechina, which means that even a 3 people court would judge. So the source for 3 people is B'kerev Elokim Yishbait. The source for 5 people that there's Shechina is agudasai. A bunch refers to 5. So how are we translating an agudas ezoiv, lakachtem agudas ezoiv, which is basically said, the wording agudas ezoiv is a sentence, it's a pasuk by the Pesach, by the Korban Pesach when they were in Egypt, and then the Gemara darshans that idea of agudas ezav applies to many other things, to other places where we have ezav. It's a Xereshava, and it basically takes that word aguda to other laws as well. But the point is that aguda, what is an eged? Eged means 3, 2. Our Gemara talks about 2 and 3. And here we have a Mishnah Perkei Avos says it means 5. So Tosfos is bothered with this question. And Tosfos says, first of all, there's other girsais. So according to the other girsa, there's a way to learn it, that you could learn that aguda means 3. He says, I'm sorry? Some girsais have it in that Mishnah that how do you know 5? It's bekerev elakim yishbait, and bekerev means half. So bekerev elakim yishbait means even though we need 10 because the previous pasuk says Ada, but bekerev elakim yishbait, kerev means half. So half of what you normally need is also the Shechina is there, and so they learn from bekerev elakim yishbait that even 5. And how do you know 3? Because agudasa al eretz yisada, that aguda means 3. So there is one way of learning that Mishnah, another girsa in that Mishnah, that it refers to 3 people. But the problem is that we have it written. It's in Gemara Brachas. It brings it. It says, how do you know 10 people? And how do you know 3 people? That Yosher Bedin, and it says Bekerev Kimishbait, which basically implies like the concept of Bekerev Elikim Yishbait is really the 3 people, not 5 people. And therefore Agudasai would basically mean 5. And so according to that, Tosfos says maybe the pasuk of Agudasai al Eretz Yisada, it's in connection with the a pasuk that says Af Yodi Yosta Eretz, which means let me just pull up this pasuk. Where does it say Agudasai al Eretz Yisada? Agudasai al Eretz Yisada, it says the Agudasai al Eretz Yisada, it says in Amos, and Af Yodi Yosta Eretz says in Yeshaya. But Tosfos says that maybe, even though we normally consider an aguda with 3, this pasuk Agudasai al Eretz Yisada refers to 5 because it says Af Yodi Yosta Eretz. It says that Hashem's hand is the foundation of the world. Because it says in a pasuk in Yeshaya that Hashem's hand is the foundation of the world, which means 5 fingers. Therefore, when it says here, Agudasai al Eretz Yisada, he established it. He established it with Aguda. Here, because this pasuk talks about establishing it with 5, so here also Agudasai refers to 5. So in other words, what Tosfos does is he finds another pasuk where it talks about the same thing that the pasuk in Amos is talking about Hashem creating the earth, and the point is that other pasuk says the word yad, and yad means 5 fingers. So therefore, he says this pasuk, even though maybe aguda normally means 3, but this pasuk where it also talks about establishing the world, Agudasai al Eretz Yisada, it's going to have to mean here 5 people, because it's based on that. It's in connection with that other pasuk that also talks about foundation of the world being 5. So
Rabbi,
that's Tosfos's answer. Yes, David.
When you're talking about 3, like a 3-person based in, so basically that means that there should be 3 judges. There shouldn't be just 1 judge, normally speaking.
So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin talks about all the different rules, what you need, how many judges you need for everything. Chalitza needs a certain amount, Kiddush HaChodesh needs, Dine Mamonais, Dine Nefashais, a Zakin Mamre, all different laws depend, there's certain laws that need 23 judges, and then the 71 judges, and there's the ten judges, or I'm sorry, 7 judges and 5 judges, the different numbers that it goes through in Sanhedrin, that it
So
talks about the
I'm
fact
just
that
thinking,
yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of the situation with Trump, where he had just one judge that was doing all this crazy stuff. So it was like,
I
according to
can't
Torah,
yeah, I can't really include politics here, but basically in Torah there is a concept of one judge, and
uh,
that is like Hataras Nadarim. Hataras Nadarim, if you have a Yachid Mumcha, you have a individual that's an expert. So there are times where it is where one judge is acceptable, so to speak.
I guess these would be mostly money situations.
So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos does say monetary laws. Dine Mamonais. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says Dine Mamonais b'shleisha. That Mishnah goes through a bunch of categories there, and it deals with how many judges you need.
So it should be three, it would seem. So that one judge is not being crooked or something.
Right. I mean, again, you have to look through the Gemaras there and the commentaries, the Shainim, see if there ever is such a, it's probably a topic of its own right. We have to go through some Choshen Mishpat and see if there's any exceptions to the rule. But the simple Mishnah does delineate the different categories and how many judges you need.
Okay, thanks.
So the Gemara here was dealing with Eged. So we talked about also the concept of, if you have in the beginning a certain amount is called an Eged, and then even afterwards Shiarav, that if some fall out, one falls out, it's possible that it's still kosher. And also the fact that if it gets chopped off, if some, I guess it falls, breaks off, or when they sprinkle too many times, I guess pieces fall off. And therefore the Mishnah, or the Brisa, goes through the different cases. It's actually a Brisa here where it talks about the Shiarav. The Mishnah also mentioned Shiarav. The Mishnah in Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi mentioned about Mitzvah Zezav is Shleisha Gevailim, Shiarav is Shnayim. And then the Brisa talked about the Shiarav. And then the Brisa also mentioned, and the Mishnah mentioned Gardumav, if it breaks, when the Ezav pieces, I guess, are very easy to break, so they break off, it could still be kosher. Kol shehu, the law of Gardumav. So these are some of the laws that we talked about yesterday, and the conclusion was that in the Chachamim, the opinion was that you need 3 for the mitzvah, and 2 is the bottom line, that you really need 2 to make a kosher ezav for the sprinkling, and if one falls out, it's still kosher. So even if you have, after you sprinkled once, and you only have one left, it's still considered kosher, even though you only have one left, which is definitely interesting, because our Gemara understands that an eged is definitely not one. So it deserves to be thought about. How does this work? That if there's one, it could still be kosher. How could it still be kosher if there's one left? Seemingly, it has something to do with the fact that it started out with 2, which is an eged, which is considered a bundle. And so even though afterwards one falls out, maybe somehow the term bunch is still acceptable. Definitely an interesting thing. In other words, we're understanding that you need to have 2. at first, and if you don't have two at first, it's puzzle. As it says, the conclusion of the Gemara was Ad shetei tchilasai kishiyarav echad. It's puzzle if it has one in the beginning. That means you really need to have two. So how does it work to have one to the Evet? Definitely, it definitely deserves. Is it a derabanan that midaraisa maybe one is enough, or midaraisa maybe you don't need an eged. So therefore, the Rabbanan only said l'chatchila. You have to somehow work out how this could be could fit logically. In other words, if an eged needs to have two, so how are we permitting the shiarov when there's only one left over? How could that be considered good enough?
Rabbi, isn't there, let's say you had a minion with exactly 10 and the person started the Hazara and then somebody left but
Right,
you don't
right.
stop, you
You're
keep
right.
going.
You're right. You're
So
right. There is such a
maybe
story.
because but you can't start with 9, but you can start with 10, and then if you lost somebody, you can still finish what you're doing. I don't know if it's related, but it's a concept.
Yeah, so the point is that the Chazar Hashatz, you started the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and the fact that you started it with a minyan allows you to conclude it to do a complete. In other words, this is a Chazar, this is a real repetition. It's called a repetition of a congregation. Why? How can you call it a repetition of a congregation if you don't have a congregation there now? Because it started out as a congregation when you started the repetition. So we consider it a repetition of the congregation, even if you don't really have a full congregation. You know what I mean? So it works. In other words, it's allowed to be considered a repetition of a congregation because it was started as a congregation. This is the congregation, Daven Shemon Esrei together. They started the repetition. So you can call it a repetition of a congregation, even if it no longer the congregation is no longer fully there. Not only that, you can even do a Kaddish. There's a Kaddish afterwards that has Tiskabel. There's a discussion about the other Kaddish after Tachnun, but the Kaddish after Tiskabel, for sure, you could say. And that Kaddish after Tiskabel, that has Tiskabel Tzloisan, listen to our prayers, that Kaddish could also be recited because that Kaddish is all about the communal repetition. So since you have a communal repetition, so the Kaddish is on the communal repetition, which definitely is an interesting thing because Kaddish normally you're not allowed to say without a minyan. It's a davar shebakdusha. So how could you say it, even though it's going on the repetition, but seemingly you're not allowed to say a Kaddish without a minyan. So the fact that you're saying a Kaddish is definitely also it sort of like brings this it brings your point even stronger than the repetition. The repetition, you could say, this is a Chazar Hashatz repetition. But Kaddish, you don't even have a minyan. How are you doing a Davar Shebakdusha with Kaddish? That's definitely an interesting question. I understand the Kaddish is going on the Shemona Esrei, but still, it's a Davar Shebakdusha. And a Davar Shebakdusha, you can't really do without a minyan. The only thing it reminds me of is...
whatever he says. Okay, hold on, Paul. I have to...
Okay. The only thing that this reminds me of is there is in Parshas Balak where but Bilam knew what was Bilam's trick. He knew exactly when Hashem curses the Yidden. He knew the second Hashem curses Kibbur Rega Biyapo, it says Hashem curses the Yidden for a second. So the famous question is, how is he going to utter a curse in 1 second? It takes time to utter a whole long curse. So, the one of the answers that's given that Tosfos gives is that it says that as long as he starts it in that second, he can continue afterwards, because he got Hashem when he's angry, starts mentioning the curse. Somehow, the fact that he started it in the right time, that allows you to continue even afterwards, and continue saying the curse. It would have worked. Of course, Hashem didn't get angry in those days, so therefore we didn't, nothing that he did worked. But the fact that he would have started it right in the right moment, even though afterwards Hashem is no longer angry, but if he starts it in that moment of anger, then the whole curse is sort of like it's applied to that moment. But anyway, so that's like a similar idea, that like you started the Chazaras Hashatz with a minyan, so the whole Kaddish is almost like it's almost like you're saying Kaddish with the minyan, because the Kaddish and the Chazaras Hashatz go together, I guess. I guess that's probably the meaning, that the Kaddish is sort of like part of the Chazaras Hashatz. So you have a minyan, because this is a Chazaras Hashatz Kaddish with a minyan, that had a minyan. I guess it's considered like a minyan, maybe because you started it with a minyan. I don't know, it definitely deserves to be looked into.
Rabbi, question.
Yeah.
I always thought it was the first Kaddish that occurs. If there were no Tachanun, the first Kaddish that would occur would be the short Kaddish.
No.
At that point, from that point on, if you didn't have a minyan, you couldn't say any more Kaddishes.
Right, I hear what you're saying, but no, the reason it's the Kaddish of Tiskabel, which is the Kaddish after Uvolat Tzion, is because that Kaddish is all about, not all, but that Tiskabel is that asking Hashem to listen to your Shemona Esrei, listen to your prayer. Tiskabel Tzloisain, may it be accepted. The Tzloisain is the prayers, the begging, the asking. May our davening, Tzloisain is the davening. So may our davening be accepted, uva usain, in our requests, baya, our requests, our tiskabel Tzloisain of usain, the whole base Yisrael, of all Klal Yisrael, kadam avunde v'shmaya v'emru amen, before
that's for
Father. So
that's for the entire Shachrit.
Right, but the main request that we're asking in Shacharis, a lot of Shacharis is praises of Hashem. Especially Psukei de Zimra, even the Berachas Kriya Shema, a lot of it is praises of Hashem. It's it's the angels are praising Hashem, thanking Hashem for the Ma'irais, Yitzchok Ma'irais. It's a praise or to Hashem, and it's Gal Yisrael, Hashem redeemed Klal Yisrael, Beicha B'Am Yisrael B'Yava. So the main requests are in the Shemona Esrei, and even in Shemona Esrei, it's only the middle 13 brachas. Now, so the Tiskabel Tzloisain Kaddish is going on the Shemona Esrei. So because it's going on the Shemona Esrei, that's why it would be allowed to be recited even without.
It doesn't matter if I put it in my own name.
Even though you don't have the minyan, now, but it's considered. Somehow it's considered like you have the minyan for it. So I'm just guessing that maybe it's sort of like almost like it's a part of the Chazaras Hashatz, where we say that you started with a minyan. So maybe the Kaddish is part of that. That it's like so connected that it's considered part of the Shemona Esrei. Because otherwise you're not supposed to. Ain't davar shebekdusha pachos me'asara. You can't really do a davar shebekdusha without a minyan.
So
anyway,
this related to if the sukkah is good when it starts and the schach becomes puzzle in the middle of your meal, you have to go inside, or you just have to stop eating, or you just keep on eating? Is this related to the davening part with the Kaddish?
No, Victor wants to connect it here to our discussion of the Eged, which is a Eged of regarding the laws of the sprinkling of with the hyssop, with a Azav, the hyssop with 3, that somehow if you start with 2, according to the rabbis, you started with 2, that's kosher, even though we only have 1 left. Maybe it's still considered like it's a bundle. It's still called a bundle, even though you don't have a bundle anymore, because the beginning sprinkling was started with with a bundle. Yeah, it
So,
definitely
so
deserves
is
to
in a
be.
broad, so in a broad sense, it's talking about it was schach that was kosher, and then
Well,
because
if you want to connect this to schach, this would be connected to the laws of
Including the
uh,
third party?
the laws of the prohibition of having a bundle of schach on your sukkah, what's called a bundle. So that would be how you would connect it to the schach. That if it's a bundle of two, is that called a bundle, or do you need to have three to be called a bundle?
so I'm saying
If
so
one
this
would
is
fall out, would it still be a bundle? Yeah, that's interesting what you're trying to say, David. That what you're adding to our discussion is that if we want to apply this to schach, maybe this would mean that if you put your bundle on your sukkah with two bunches, and you have two bunches that are tied together, and then one falls out, would that still be called a bundle and prohibit your schach, or would it be considered like now it's kosher? That's an interesting way of applying this law. Again, I don't know if you can say that, and I'll tell you why. The simple way of learning our Gemara is at this point we're not connecting it to Sukkah. We're once we know how many is an aguda, that's the end. Now we finished the Sukkah rules. Now we're talking about the Hyssop rules about one falling out, because all of our Mishnayos and Brises are dealing with the laws of Hyssop, the sprinkling and so on, and Paraduma.
So
So that would be a simple way. Now, if you want to try to apply this to Sukkah, like you just said, which is an interesting way of taking the Gemara fully and applying everything that we said here over there, the problem that you're going to have is that if a branch falls out from your bundle, so it's no longer called a bundle. The fact is that if it was placed there to dry, and so it was placed be'isser, called ta'asev lemin asud, and then a piece falls out, so what are you going to say? It's kosher now? You can't really say it's kosher now, because it was still placed without having in mind for schach. It was placed there to dry. So you placed it there for the wrong purpose, and now it's kosher because you want it to be schach. It's called tasav lemon also. It's now kosher because you want it to be schach. It's not kosher because you did it. You built it wrong. Oh, but one of the branches fell out. That's also tasav lemon also. That's also that it was done without your involvement. When the branch falls out, it's done without your involvement. Now, let's try to pick the other case. Maybe this, you might be able to say it. How about in a case where you put it on properly? You put on the bundle in a kosher way, because you put it for schach purposes. And the rabbis said this is not kosher because of the zera. And now one falls out. Now one falls out. Are you going to call this an eged still? So if one falls out, it's no longer a bundle. What do you people think? Should that be kosher? You put on a bundle of schach to dry, but it was tied. So our Mishnah says chabile kash and chabile zrodim is invalid. It's not a kosher. Ein masach. Can't use it. It's rabbinically prohibited. What happens if something falls out? If one piece falls out, it's no longer called a bundle. Remember, we had a Yerushalmi that says you need 25 pieces. We have our Gemara that says you need 2 or 3. So anyway, one falls out. It's no longer a bundle. Would that be considered, or according to our Gemara, if one falls out, it is considered a bundle. If 2 fall out, maybe it's not a bundle anymore. But if one falls out, it is considered a bundle. So what would be the din in this case where one falls out? Are we going to say it's still prohibited, or will we say that it's kosher? What do you think?
awesome.
What is that?
It was wrongly placed. It doesn't
It was
matter
wrongly placed
what falls
rabbinically.
out.
It was
Doesn't matter what
rabbinically
falls out.
wrongly.
That's on.
It doesn't matter what falls out. If it's
It doesn't matter.
wrongly placed,
It was
it's fine.
placed problem. So what you're saying is the rule of tasev loymin ha'asui also applies to a rabbinic prohibition. In other words, on a simple level, you could say that tasev loymin ha'asui applies to a biblical problem. If you put your sukkah together in a way that it's invalid biblically, and then somehow you switch something around, or you have in mind, oh, I'm leaving it there for shade now. Now I'm having in mind for shade, so it's there for shade. But you put it there in a wrong way, that's a problem. Tasev loymin ha'asui. Do you take that rule of tasev loymin ha'asui and say, oh, I put it there rabbinically as a problem because I put it there for shade, but it was a bundle. So it's very similar to a problematic type of case. And therefore the rabbis prohibited this. Will we say then that if it becomes kosher, will it still have a problem of tasev loymin ha'asui if it becomes kosher? In other words, even in that case? Or if it becomes kosher, then maybe it's fine. So if we go back to that case, actually, if we take a look in Shulchan Aruch, let's take a look at that case again. Also, lasachich b'chavila can't be masachich with a chavila because sometimes a person does it for drying purposes, and it's a problem tasev loymin ha'asui. And they made exera all chavilos atuzais. Bekivan shebenezas rula yotzukol lesser alav chavila shelach liyavta means apoxim chavi kanami. It's only prohibited if it has 25 reeds, and therefore any chavila that has less than that you're allowed to use. And if it has chavi kanama yoser. If you have 25 coming from one stem, 25 reeds coming out of it, so or one, literally it means a stump, like a stem. So and you tie the other side together, that's not called a chavila because it's all one. And if you tie one more reed together with it, that means you'll have two entities, and altogether 25 reeds or 26 reeds. So altogether you have 25. It says altogether you have 25. That is considered a bundle, and that would be prohibited. Now, any bundle that's not tied on both sides that you could carry it with, that's not called a chavila, and you would be allowed to be masachich. Now, the Mishnah Berurah here says that here it's more chomer than the previous case. Here it's more strict than previous cases, because even b'diavad, once you did it, it's still usher. And it's not similar to the previous cases that it's only we're afraid that you might leave the sukkah. But here it's chavila, it's puzzle because of an issue of you're going to make a sukkah tasev loymin ha'asui. So there, because of that's the reason, b'diavad, it's also puzzle in our communities that they sell agudos anfe ilonis, that they sell these bundles of branches. They call them yelnit. And you cut them to distribute in your house. It's possible that that's not called a chavila because it's not normally used to dry. You don't leave it to dry. Rather, they need to be moist. So because you don't use it to dry, it would seem that's not a problem. That's one case that the Mishnah Berurah brings. Now, the main point is the next one. Is this other law in paragraph 17. If you did do a chavila and you untied it, it's kosher. Why? Because the whole problem is only because of a gzeira. So you don't need to do more. It's not similar to the case of cutting a tree that's on a sukkah that it should be for schach. You need to wave it or lift it up, put it down for schach, because the cutting is not called a maisa, and so here the untying of it, that because it's not really prohibited, because you did put it for schach, it's only a gzeira, and therefore it's different. Over there, the psul was the araisa, and it's because of mechuber. So we need an action a full action that will remove it, nianua. And therefore, if you place the chavila that's prohibited biblically, then you would actually have to untie it, and you'd have to lift it up and untie it and move it from its place and so on. So here it's more lenient. The problem is
Is he frozen or is it me?
the problem is there you need to untie it. So I think maybe Ezra might be right. I don't know. This is an interesting question that we've come up with based on David's question. What would happen if you didn't untie it? It got untied on its own. In other words, do you need to have that action of untying it in order to permit it, or as long as it's not similar? Actually, I'm not sure. I don't know. I think there's a good question. Maybe because it's only a rabbinic decree, now it's no longer falls within the rabbinic decree. I don't know if we'll say tasav leimena also on a rabbinic issue, that if you put it there for a wrong purpose, do you need to? I mean, that's really our question. Do we say tasav leimena also on a rabbinic invalidation, or do we only say that on a biblical invalidation? That's really the question that we're dealing with, and that is a very good question. And if we would say it on a rabbinic invalidation, then we'd have to figure out what would happen if one falls out. Would that still be called an eged, a bundle, and would still be prohibited? Because that even one is called a bundle. Would one be called a bundle even for regarding sukkah? How far do we take this? That if one falls out, is that only a law regarding hyssop? Or if one falls out, would we still call that an eged? And if it would be called an eged, then you have a problem that you have a bundle. But on the other hand, according to the rules of Chavila, there's no reason to make a rabbinic decree here. But you did put it there in a wrong way. So do we consider the way you put it there initially to be a problem or not? And maybe now, when it falls out,
Problem still
anyway,
exists.
I'm going to have to think about it. Okay.
Rabbi, the problem still exists no matter what.
The problem still exists. What problem? Because you're going to call it an egg.
The fact that you put it in, when you put it down, you had in mind that it was going to remain tied. So you didn't do anything. So something fell out. It still, the following day when you make the Lesheva Sukkah, you're doing it in a sukkah that has a problem. And it's the same thing with the Azov. Fine. Maybe the first time it's good and one falls out, But then from that point on, when you're trying to use that to sprinkle for the next individual or the person after that, you're doing it with something less than what was required.
I hear what you're saying, but the question really is that because you put it on biblically in a right way, you did do it kosher biblically. It's only a rabbinic decree, so there's room to, as we see, there's differences there. Like, for example, if you untie it, it's good enough. You don't have to re-wave it. So because it's rabbinic, there might be also a leniency if the, just like if you untie it, the question is what happens if it gets untied on its own? That be would that also exist?
Mm-hmm.
If
So
it
there's
got
a little switch like on the phone.
why is my
It will, it's right over here.
okay? So if it was done biblically, you're right. But if it was done, in other words, if it was a prohibited biblically, if it was prohibited biblically, you're correct. If it's prohibited rabbinically, there's room to see it in different ways, different perspectives. On the one hand, you did it wrong. You did it rabbinically wrong. Rabbinically, this is not acceptable, and maybe you need to do an action that will permit it, and that seems to be the way you're seeing it, and I hear that view. There's another way of looking at it that as long as it doesn't fall into the category of the rabbinic prohibition anymore, maybe it's automatically exempt, and maybe we don't have to worry about tasev lemino asi on a biblical prohibition. Because when the Torah says tasev lemino asi, it's talking about the Torah laws. It shouldn't be asu. But rabbinically, maybe that's not a problem. So that would be, and then the other question is, do we take this law of what aguda means, an eged, and do we apply it here? Because if one falls out, are we still going to call this an eged or not? That's also an important question to ask. That over there, it seems like we call it an eged even if one falls out. So here, for example, we by regarding Sukkah, normally we would not prohibit this in the first place. But if one falls out, one branch falls out, so it's no longer is it still an eged even regarding the laws of Sukkah or not? Which also boils down to the question of what is the source of this problem regarding the laws of Azov. In other words, regarding the laws of Paraduma, does one really work biblically? So really one is called an eged? Or is it only for some reason there's some limud, there's some way of learning that it's considered an eged? In other words, it's maybe some extra special law regarding paraduma that we're going to allow this. So we have to look up also the laws over there. Why shiyarov? Why, if it's the leftover, if you have one, according to the rabbis, would still be good?
So, Rabbi, this is my question is, so does a person have to stop eating in the middle of the sukkah? I mean, in the middle of the situation where the pschach becomes puzzle. Because
so in your scenario, you definitely have to stop eating, definitely. And not only that, I would question if your schach was kosher in the first place, all throughout the previous days of sukkahs, because was it a schach that's going to it's going to break apart and fall off, or and maybe it wasn't schach that would last for 7 days. So that could be problematic even without. So you're in your scenario, but the question that you asked to led us to this other interesting question. So it's thank you for bringing it up. Yes, Moshe.
What about, there's a few things I wanted to ask you before about moss, if it's in the form of a bundle, okay, or something that's been tied naturally, let's say by a swamp area, let's say, as opposed to somebody who tied a bundle, okay? I mean, if a branch comes out of one that's been tied by somebody, it's b'diavad. I mean, it's not considered kosher anymore. But if it's, let's say, something that's natural that was tied by, let's say, by Hashem's hand, something that like moss or something like that, and something comes out of it, would that be considered kosher if something comes out of that? If a piece or something comes out of that?
Thing like fungus type of thing growing on.
Yeah, fungus or moss, like
growing.
by a swamp. We didn't take into account moss. Moss is different than just branches. It's a little bit different.
It's like a bacteria type of thing growing on it. So it's not,
if you go to a swamp, you see
vegetation.
there's hanging moss, off of trees.
Yeah.
It's not the same as branches.
The branches. It's not like it's not regular vegetation. It's like is that what you would consider it? More like mold,
if you
like,
reach down and pulled out a clump of stuff from the water and it's tied together, somehow it wrapped itself around.
It's like
you're making up hypotheticals already. We'll make up hypotheticals.
Wait, so you're asking in general about moss, or you're asking if moss is considered like a bundle? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, because it's like tied. You see it when it comes down. It's almost like tied. If you look at that.
Right.
Go to a swamp area.
Which swamp?
Interesting.
Like Central Florida, for example. Central Florida, you go to Central Florida, you can see hanging moss. It's sometimes it's like tied almost together.
Yeah, I would guess that, as the Mishnah Brewer mentions here, that there's no things that you don't normally dry out. People don't normally take that stuff to even use for anything, so there's no gzeira on it. So I would think that it would not be a problem, because who's using that stuff? It's never.
Rebbe?
They don't sell it in Home Depot. Yes.
I had a slightly different question. I missed the beginning of the whole Indian, the few minutes. Eged is a bundle. Is that spelled the same as the Israeli bus company?
I think so, yeah.
So did the word come, you said, from being crowded or bundled?
Well, aguda is like agudas Yisrael. It's also used for people. Like an aguda, and we mentioned a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that the Shechina comes when you have 5 people.
Right.
So you have the word aguda by people. So I don't know if Eged is like
no, I'm just curious. Reality,
group travel,
get the name from?
Right. I guess it would be from group travel.
Oh,
Eged would be like group travel.
Are you sure it wasn't the?
I thought crowded buses. Thank you.
Are you sure it wasn't the coming together of several bus lines to form one bus line that becomes?
That could be. Yeah, that could be. If that's true, I don't know the origin of Eged, but there used to be many different companies and they all joined together, because now I think there are a lot of different companies besides Eged. But anyway, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, it's like Igud Harabanim, right? Like the
right.
Okay, so getting back to
all the bus companies got together and made Agudas Yisrael.
Okay, so then the Gemara mentioned about Meremar.
That was a garbage pickup.
Meremar Darshant, Darash Meremar. And what does he say? That the Asur Yasa of Surah, even though they tie these bundles together, you could still use them, because the whole tying purpose has nothing to do with drying out. The purpose of tying them together is in order to have a certain number that they, I guess, to know the number that they are, so they tie them together. When the person buys it, he unties it. He doesn't keep them that way. They're not meant to last. The tying is not meant to last. So you would never dry it out with this, the way it's tied. So the whole problem of bundles is because people would dry it out that way, and then you might end up doing the same thing. Here, you don't normally do it that way, and therefore it would not be a problem. It's not dried out when it's tied. Amar Rabbi, so Rabbi Abba said the Tzrife de Orbani, and this referred to some type of a dome-like structure, where it's I guess flimsy structure, where you're making it out of willows, and you're tying the top of the willows all together, into a little one point in the middle. And then they all, it's like a yarmulke. It looks like a yarmulke. And they're all tied together on the top of the yarmulke. And
Rabbi, I have a picture. You want to see?
okay.
Rabbi Nachman's yarmulkes.
Right. Then that's right. That's right. This
They're translating Sefaria just translated as Srife as huts.
Right, but it just seems like yeah. Okay. So the top is tied together, and the bottom is also woven together. They don't show it really. The understanding I have is it has much more willows than that. That looks like it only has 4 willow walls, but really it has 50 willow parts of the wall. It's a round dome of 50 willows, and then on the bottom of it there's a willow that goes around it that was woven sort of like in between each in and out. And so it's tied together on the top and tied together on the bottom. Okay. Thank you, David, for the...
well, the other model, the San Martino model, has a lot more on it.
So anyway, the bottom line is that these sherife, these huts of Orbany, of the willow, that are... that once you untie the top, it says they're kosher. So the understanding was that because it's tied,
but this would be a problem. But this is okay. No, it's schach or lulav.
The problem for schach that
no, once it's untied.
Once it's untied, it wouldn't be a problem. The problem is there's a tie, there's an upper tie and there's a lower tie. So the Gemara says once you untie the upper one, then it would be kosher for schach. But the problem is the Gemara says, what about the bottom one? So here we have 2 opinions. Rav Papa says, well, you have to untie it, even though you don't undo it, even though it's still there, but it's untied. As long as it's untied, you don't have any more problem of a bundle. And Rav Huna, Rav Yeshua, says that even if you don't untie the bottom one, if it's not made to carry that way, it's not called an eged. So it wouldn't be a problem of a chavila, of a bundle. And the point is that the bottom one is gonna fall apart. You can't really carry it that way, and therefore it would not be similar to the case of the gezerah of the decree. What we're afraid of is similar to a bundle that you would leave on your roof. This is a bundle that's not. It doesn't hold. It won't hold, and because of that, it would be. It's going to fall apart. And it's not going to hold. So the Shulchan Aruch, we just saw that it actually follows this view, and it says that it mentions that a bundle that's not tied on both ends so that you could carry it, it's not called a chavila. You're allowed to use it. So if it only has one tie, it wouldn't be a problem. Meaning that the problem with you don't even have to untie it because you can't carry it like this. So it would fall apart. This is not similar to the decree. However, if it has one tie in the middle and you could carry it that way, so then it would be a problem. So the main leniency here is because it's only on one end, and because it's only on one end, it ain't gonna work. It's gonna fall apart. Now, so this is the opinion of Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. So we now see these two laws about if it's bundle because of counting purposes, but not in order to use that way, to keep that way, and people might dry it out that way. It's not used for that purpose. It's only for counting. That's not called a bundle. A bundle is not called a bundle if it's purpose is if it can't be held that way, it's gonna fall apart. It only has one tie on the side. That would not be a bundle either. Okay, now the Gemara talks about the leaves for regarding the laws of Oyel and regarding the laws of Sukkah. Amar Reb Abba Amar Shmuel. This is where we're up to, I think. The 13b by the dot over there. Amar Reb Abba Amar Shmuel. So we're about, what is it, 8, maybe 9 lines from the top of the page. Amar Reb Abba Amar Shmuel 13b. Reb Abba says in the name of Shmuel, Yerakei Sha'amru Chachamim, the leaves of vegetable leaves that the rabbis talked about, that you could fulfill the mitzvah of maror, basically means like lettuce, romaine lettuce. So those leaves of that you could fulfill the mitzvah of maror on Pesach, the Gemara, the Reb Abba in the name of Shmuel tells us a few laws about them. Number one is mevi'in es hatuma. They bring tuma if they are an oyhel, if they are a tent above something that's above a dead body. So they could be a tent that will cause something else under it to be tame. So if you have a big leaf of lettuce, dead body under part of it, there's also a mug on the other side of it, under it, also under the same leaf. So that would, mevi'in es hatuma, would make the mug impure. Because these leaves are called a oyel. They're called an oyel, they're a tent. However, ve'ein chaitzin b'fnei hatuma, if something's on top of the leaf, and under the leaf is a dead body, and on top of the leaf is this mug. I don't know how it's being held up, but something, or maybe something lighter than a mug, or a spoon or something. I don't know. So whatever. So the law is that it's not chaitzitz. It doesn't separate from the dead body's tumah goes up, and this leaf does not separate from the things above it. Even though normally we would say something that's an oyel separates it, but here it doesn't. Now, in order to understand this, this is the rule. Biblically, when there is a kezias of a corpse, a size of an olive, so this will cause something to be considered an oyel above it to make impure things that are under the same tent. So oyel needs tent. So something that's under the same tent, even if the person doesn't, even if the whole corpse is not there, even just a olive size from the corpse is there, it will make impure something else that's under the same oyel. Now, that oyel, that tent, would normally prohibit things that are above it. Would normally block things from being tameh that are above it, because just like it becomes the tent over it, this is like boxing in the impurity. So anything above it should be pure, and the impurity won't go above it. So normally these things go hand in hand. If it's a tent, it's a tent. It does both. It encloses the impurity, that only things that are under the same tent will be impure, and anything above it will not be impure. However, there is a problem. The problem is, what happens if this item itself is, this tent itself is makabel tumah? So if the tent itself is makabel tumah, so if it is a recipient of tumah, so that means the tent itself is becoming tameh. It's not going to block stuff from above it from becoming tameh. So that's the problem that we have here. Now, so it's going to bring tumah to anything else under the tent, and it's not going to block stuff that the tumah from going above. How do we look at these vegetables, these lettuce? So these lettuce, the way it's looked at is that they're fit to be Makabel Tumah. That's the way we see them. And therefore, because they're fit to be Makabel Tumah, therefore, we are considering them that they're not going to block any Tumah. However, we have to say, and we'll soon see why later, of course, tomorrow, that we're going to have to say that they're not fully susceptible to be Makabel Tumah, but they're partially susceptible to be Makabel Tumah, to receive impurity. And the reason is because if they haven't been washed yet. Once they're washed, they're fully susceptible to be Makabel Tumah. And they're not washed yet. So here, they're not huchsher, they're not prepped for Tumah. And therefore, there is this interesting law about them, which we'll see tomorrow, Mi'at Hashem. So we're going to stop here. Zai gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.